We have spent more than $2 billion on the greatest scientific gamble in history, and we have won. It is an awful responsibility which has come to us. We thank God that it has come to us instead of to our enemies, and we pray that He may guide us to use it in His ways and for His purposes.
Watch an atomic test. Watch.
The atomic age has moved forward at such a pace that clearly, if the peoples of the world are to conduct an intelligent search for peace, they must be armed with the significant fact.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
The problems of Vietnam are quite complex. Vietnam is the arena where communist expansionism is most aggressively at work in the world today.
The world has never known a day quite like today. It faced the considerable uncertainties and dangers of the worst nuclear power plant accident of the atomic age. And the horror tonight is that it could get much worse.
North Korea is vowing to launch a preemptive nuclear strike against the United States just hours
in
before.
1951, I helped design the first thermonuclear weapon test.
He's taken ownership. That thing that he helped build, the hydrogen bomb. He is a complete expert in nuclear proliferation problems and missile defense problems.
Really very important is the preservation of a democratic system, so that people should be interested and able, in a democratic way, to determine their future. That's really the biggest risk. You know, it's good to be close to the president, but the president and his national security advisor don't naturally turn to the scientists. They've got something that they need to do, and it's not that they say, don't confuse me with facts, but they need to make a decision and they don't have time to learn. The only thing that really works is education. Many presidents have said the equivalent of, I agree with you, I know what I have to do, now make me do it. I never met personally alone with Eisenhower. He came into a meeting where we were, and then I met personally with Kennedy, Johnson, as part of the President's Science Advisory Committee, then Nixon, and
you met with Nixon?
Yeah, and Carter, Jimmy Carter. After Reagan, George H.W. Bush, just plain old George Bush.
And you were pretty active in the Clinton administration.
Yeah, yes. You know, aside from their position, they're really ordinary people. And they should try to remember that.
Hello, Dick. Hi, good to see you. It is a treat for me.
Thank you.
Hi. Every time I encounter something about you, I learn still more.
Yeah. Well, people have asked me, and they ask my interlocutors, if you had 30 seconds with the president, what would you say?
Well, you've done that many times.
In 2003, when I received the National Medal of Science from George W. Bush, and we were waiting for a photo opportunity for the White House we were organizing, so I arranged to stand next to the president. So I said, one thing that you really ought to be doing is to ensure that people who get advanced degrees in this country from foreign countries
get to stay. He understood that, I'll bet.
Yeah, but it's 2013.
It hasn't quite happened yet.
Does the system work, giving decision makers some sober stuff?
It works better than if nobody were doing it. And so thank God for Dick Garwin, because sometimes he's the only one who has said, no, wait a minute, step back, let's look at the elementary scientific questions, those things that are incontrovertible, and see what they say about this policy issue. Efficient cars, missile defense, climate change, nuclear power. It brings sanity and reality to the debate, at least for those who listen to Dick.
Thank you. I try to be helpful, even if it doesn't forward my current campaign. So it's a complicated world, and you have to think of the simplest way to present something. Fuller Lodge and the Los Alamos Boys School is why Los Alamos is here. Otherwise, they would have had some other isolated place for putting together the nuclear explosive, making plutonium metal and fashioning it into nuclear weapons, casting and machining the uranium. Oppenheimer, a Jewish boy from a wealthy family, sent out here, I suppose, for the sports and the air, fell in love with the place. During the Second World War, when General Leslie Groves was looking for a place to actually build the atomic bomb, Oppenheimer brought him out here and showed him how isolated it was and that they could move the boys' school out. This was never a part of the Los Alamos laboratory. This was only the reason the Los Alamos laboratory is here. So they shut it down, they moved the students out. I don't know where they all went. In 1950 or 51, Fuller Lodge really was a dining room. And so I would come over with Fermi, just walking the few blocks.
So Oppie, as the scientific leader was known, together with others, approached Groves, now a brigadier general. They advised him that a new laboratory was needed where people and equipment could be brought together for a more productive exchange of information and ideas. Scientists began arriving from all parts of the United States and England and disappeared from the world. As Oppenheimer put it, the notion of disappearing into the New Mexico desert for an indeterminate period and under quasi-military auspices disturbed a good many scientists and the families of many more.
I haven't been to see the apartments, no. I've been to Los Alamos many, many times. Good. That entrance there, and we lived up above. The Zia company gave us a list of furniture, and we had to check off that we had exactly as many forks, spoons, bedspreads, and beds and chairs as were on the Zia list, and that they were all accounted for at the end of the summer. The Zia company, they were the interface with the people who lived here, I guess you could put it. It was time of the Korean War, actually. I just got my PhD with Enrico Fermi at the University of Chicago in December 1949.
Dick asked Enrico a question, a physics question, I assume, and he said to Dick, well, I can't discuss that with you now, but how about coming to Los Alamos this summer, and then when you get your clearance, then we can talk about that. And then Dick came home and said, how would that be? I said, well, okay.
And Fermi suggested that it would be valuable to me and to the nuclear weapons effort if I would be a consultant to Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory in the summers. We shared an office in the theoretical division, which was right there by Ashley Pond. Eisenhower came in and promised to get us out of Korea.
The ancient horror of war. Humanity has now achieved, for the first time in its history, the power to end its history. This truth must guide our every deed. It makes world disarmament a necessity of world life. For I repeat again this simple declaration. The only way to win World War III is to prevent it.
He was the one who, regarded nuclear weapons really as the opportunity to reduce the defense budget, as providing a bigger bang for the buck. It was really nice.
Thoughts and feelings as powerful as the explosion rushed through the exhausted witnesses.
What have we done? And I remembered the line from the Bhagavad Gita. I am the Countess, the destroyer of worlds. I remembered that Sanskrit line.
Here are the two first bombs. This is the little boy, the uranium-235 gun-assembled weapon that destroyed Hiroshima on August 5th, 1945. And here's the Fat Man, the plutonium-fueled implosion weapon. It weighed, it says, 11,000 pounds. It had a yield of 21,000 tons of TNT, and it compressed plutonium, an initial solid ball, into a supercritical mass. Here's a picture of people on Tinian. Here is Harold Agnew, whom you interviewed.
Well, I was at Los Alamos during that time, and I flew to Hiroshima, and we measured the yields. I flew on the bombing mission. I was 24, and our pilot was 24. Looked out, turns out this little window, and saw Hiroshima very distinctly. We'd seen a map or a photo of what it looked like with the rivers coming together and the quays and things. Got a signal from the bomb plane that the bomb bay doors had opened. Then we got a signal the bomb had dropped. As soon as that happened, our bombardier dropped our gauges. As soon as the bomb was dropped, Tibbets dove to the right. We dove to the left to get out of the way. Otherwise, we've been right over the blast if we'd kept our straight trajectory. I felt it, I saw the flash, and then I took pictures. And I took pictures of the cloud, but this is after. We felt the blast, the shock wave, 2 shock waves, one direct shock, one reflected off of the ground. It really shook us up. And we got data and recorded it, returned safely. All my high school guys were all killed in the Pacific. So I had a real resentment, okay? And so anything we could have done was fine with me. That's the way it was. If there hadn't been a Pearl Harbor, there wouldn't have been a Hiroshima. I've interacted with Hiroshima survivors, and they don't get it.
So we can go inside, but watch your stove. The snow is steep. This is where the gadget was assembled, which is the very first atomic test that was detonated in southern New Mexico.
Los Alamos was the place created with Oppenheimer in charge to build the bombs. Fermi was making the reactor in order to be able to make plutonium, which could be chemically separated from the uranium in order to make bombs.
This is where they did early assembly work for the combat units for the Fat Man weapon. It was active, and they did some later assembly work up until, I think, the 60s. It's cold, but it's dry. We have a series of little notes on the wall. You can tell from here there's many more phone numbers. This is where the phone used to be. Yeah.
Just technical details. When you work with explosives, you really worry about sparks. There's the big stuff. Even more than fire. You know, explosives will burn mostly, but they may explode. But you see these lightning conductors. So there are lightning arresters up on top because it's always lightning here in the summertime.
Exactly. Days after the dropping of the weapons in Japan, the laboratory is already gearing up to improve the design. Essentially, there was a transition from Manhattan Project to the Atomic Energy Commission in January of 1947. And so it's interesting talking to you because you represent, sort of the next line of development from the implosion weapon in the work that you do.
It's certainly of historic importance because that's where the first nuclear weapon was made. And you have a candy kettle for melting the explosives. People didn't decide what would be the best thing to do, but what would be good enough to do it in time. Teller was looking for any help he could get. He talked to me and he said, "This is what I need." He may have said it to other people, who knows? But I was the one who was able to do it. In about a month, I produced a secret memo, 4 pages, and a big fold-out diagram, and decided that it was easiest and quickest to do it at full scale.
Actually, the cab, so called because it houses the weapon, is not a cab at all, but a building set flush to the ground.
I tried to devise small-scale experiments and decided really that the easiest thing to do, given the magnificent resources available, was to burn liquid deuterium compressed, highly compressed, by this new idea, by radiation implosion, highly secret concept at the time.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, T0.
Robust at almost 11 megatons yield. Almost 1,000 times that of the original Hiroshima bomb.
I don't think I've ever put it into words. The bomb went off and I thought we were all alone in the world and the world had come to an end. I remember distinctly the heat wave on the face and then the sound and then the clouds forming overhead, mushroom clouds. And I've not forgotten it. It's impressive to see an H-bomb go off from within a few 10 kilometers. It started to rain, and it did that, and it turned out that there was a highly radioactive rain. The ship has never been useful ever since. And we all took off our clothes and threw them overboard and took a shower. Afterwards, of course, the tower was gone, but so was the island.
Before the blast. And here is the same area after the blast, showing the crater caused by mine.
And I probably saw the test from as near as anybody. And I'm probably now one of the few people left who monitored the test.
I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about my role in bringing hydrogen bombs, thermonuclear weapons to the world. But when I do, I think that if I hadn't done it, somebody else would. Maybe it would have taken a year longer. Wouldn't have made any difference. And am I proud of it? Yes, but not because it was destructive, but because it was, was honest. It was a thing to do. It was in the interests of the country as the leadership saw it at the time.
The importance of a scientific discovery is not measured by its consequences. A scientist has an extremely important job, and that is to make science.
Albert Einstein said that is the right to pursue truth means that we must not conceal even the smallest fact that we have discovered.
Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit.
President, Russia has launched an Earth satellite. They also claim to have had a successful firing of the intercontinental ballistics missile, none of which this country's done. I ask you, sir, what are we going to do about it?
That seems to signal a new freezing spell in the Cold War. Khrushchev outdoes his earlier outburst against President Eisenhower at the commencement of the Paris meeting.
In November 1945, Robert Oppenheimer gave a talk in Philadelphia. And this was only 3 months after the 2 nuclear weapons had been used to destroy Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Oppenheimer said that if nuclear weapons were used in a future war between 2 nuclear-armed powers, they would be used by the thousands or by the tens of thousands. Hans Bethe a physicist from Cornell who had headed the theoretical effort at Los Alamos that produced the first nuclear weapons, said that nobody who was at Los Alamos in 1945 thought that nuclear weapons would be produced in more than a few hundred.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
We had 35,000 nuclear weapons in 1967 at our peak, and the Soviet Union in 1982 had about 45,000 nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union had the ability to destroy the United States many times over. So the only defense really was deterrence.
The expectation was that the threat of massive nuclear reaction would be a credible deterrent to Soviet conventional force aggression.
A lot of my writings over the decades have been, launch on warning if necessary because you don't have the ability to survive, but everybody really believes that you must have some forces that can survive and provide unacceptable punishment to the other side. And then you don't use them. So McNamara said, if he were asked by the president, if nuclear weapons went off, he would still not use the nuclear weapons. It would take weeks for him to use the nuclear weapons.
The idea that curiosity leads to disaster has an ancient pedigree. Pandora opened the God's box and let loose all the evils of the world. Eve ate the apple of knowledge and was exiled from the Garden of Eden. We believe that curiosity is the beginning of knowledge, and especially of science. But we know that the application of science has led to disaster. The Jasons are a group of academic scientists who have full-time jobs and tenure, which means they don't need to be Jasons. And they are asked by various branches of the government for help with technical problems. They get together for 6 weeks in the summer and work on those problems. So they have to be secretive.
Dick got involved in his 20s, but I got involved in my 30s when Jason came along. So it was a long time. This is critical to the respect Jason has earned and that it's existed this way. And our reports earned us the respect because they're trusted as sound, honest, technical work.
Their advice is independent. They're not beholden to anybody. They're not owned by anybody. They're paid as consultants. At that time, the atmosphere was extremely anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian, anti-military. And when those Pentagon Papers came out with what the Jasons had done during the Vietnam War for the Defense Department, the Jasons just caught hell, and Dick was one of them.
We had a summer study after the analysis of the bombing of North Vietnam, which said, this really isn't doing a lot of good, and you ought to restrict the bombing to south of Hanoi. And then we were asked, well, what could you do actually to prevent the infiltration? So that was the origin of the anti-infiltration barrier. The idea is if you have a perfect barrier, perfectly effective, nobody's going to get hurt. Nobody tries to come across. So Jason took up the question of an air-supported barrier. We could use sensors on the ground, so we would map the Ho Chi Minh Trail, this network of roads and paths that were being used to bring supplies into South Vietnam.
Between the time the sensor went off and the time bombs came was just minutes. The reason for doing this was they thought that it could slow the supplies and the infiltration enough that maybe North Vietnam would go to the bargaining table. A publication that called the Jasons the war professors. They'd be shouted down in scientific talks. It was tough for them.
It wasn't that we were in favor of the war, it was there was a war. And some people actually resigned from government consulting because of Vietnam. Ultimately, you're a citizen before you're an advisor, and so if you're contributing to things that you can't tolerate, then you should resign and say what you think about it. I didn't think the Vietnam War was a good idea. I thought it was a very bad idea. I was on a flight to Boston from New York and sat next to a young woman, and she got up as the airplane had landed, and she stood up and shouted that this man is a baby killer.
Oh.
And they picked it at us, but they got tired because our house in Scarsdale was on a loop. There was never any traffic there, so they set up their pickets, but there was nobody to influence. Different from Washington Square in New York.
And our neighbors were all sympathetic. They stayed inside their houses. They didn't come out, so that these picketers never saw a soul.
Hi, Charles.
Hi, Dick. How have you been?
Okay.
Nice to see you
Glad
again.
to have the opportunity to talk today.
I'm looking forward to it. Talk
good.
about the history of FAS and where we're going in the future.
Yeah.
FAS began as Federation of Atomic Scientists in November 1945, just a few months after the atomic bombs were used. A couple of months later, it was rebranded as Federation of American Scientists. At our heart, we've been working on reducing nuclear dangers, and we're trying to prevent nuclear war. We're also trying to argue in favor of civilian control of nuclear technologies. Dick Garwin's on our board. Can't remember exactly how long he's been a member, but it's been a very long time. Dick is also a member of other organizations too. He serves on with UCS, Union Concerned Scientists. As you know, he served on the Jasons. So he gets around to many different organizations, and one wonders how many Dick Garwins are there.
I call upon the scientific community in our country, those who gave us nuclear weapons, to turn their great talents now to the cause of mankind and world peace, to give us the means of rendering these nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete.
Around 1983, when President Reagan gave his famous speech about the Star Wars missile defense program, I was taking a naval history course at the Naval Academy, and my professor there said for the final paper we could write on any national security topic. And I decided I wanted to write on missile defense. And I saw this article by Richard Garwin and Hans Bethe, and frankly, I didn't know who you were at the time. I knew vaguely, I had maybe heard of Hans Bethe, a Nobel Prize winner, but didn't know much about him either, and didn't realize that both of you had such a connection to Federation of American Scientists. Federation of American Scientists can take some credit for reducing the risk of nuclear war.
Here, an artist's projection of the president's vision.
Banning into space, a layered defense to protect the country from nuclear devastation.
I've been accused with a couple of other of our colleagues of being against all missile defense. My job is to keep us from building missile defenses that don't work. I'm not in favor of deploying systems that don't work and predictably won't work. And the only people who think they will are the American Congress and the American taxpayer.
The total spent on the order of $10 billion
a year.
A year.
And for the whole system for the, over history is over $100 billion. In the end, Bush decided to deploy it, and it's deployed. And we have it today, a system called the ground-based missile defense system that just doesn't work. It's never, ever been tested against a long-range missile.
Our faith is that by showing that there are better ways to accomplish things, we could reform the political system to choose the better approaches.
We are now have a problem that the Russians are maintaining more weapons than they need to try and overcome our systems that won't work. And the sad fact is that over the next 10 years, we're on pace to spend about $600 billion on nuclear weapons, for the missiles, the weapons, the ships, the subs, all. It's a lot of money for something we don't really need much of these days. The real threat we face is not a huge, massive nuclear war, but the idea of one or two weapons being stolen, misplaced, or lost, or a rogue group getting some nuclear material and able to make a nuclear bomb. And to address that threat, which can't be stopped by our missiles or our warheads, you have to basically be able to verify that these things have gone away. And my worry is that we'll have to have some incident, or actually a bomb going off perhaps, before we get to that point.
In 2006, instead of using unarmed cruise missiles, they took from the repository 6 nuclear-armed advanced cruise missiles, put them on an airplane, loaded them onto the launching racks, and flew the airplane to the Southern Air Force Base in Louisiana. So for 36 hours, nobody really knew that these nuclear weapons were sitting there on the runway, had been taken out of storage. It was a disaster. And when it was discovered, the Secretary of Defense, Bob Gates, fired the military chief of staff of the Air Force and the Secretary of the Air Force. This was an awful thing to happen. So that was an incident, and if that can happen in the United States, how much worse can it be in the Soviet Union, and how much even worse can it be in Pakistan, which has all kinds of religious and political schisms. Our nuclear weapons, of which we have 10,000 approximately, those nuclear weapons are much more a problem for our security than they are a guarantor of our security.
The Jasons issued a report on the technical value, or the lack thereof, of very low yield testing. And the results of that report, it tipped the balance in favor of a zero yield comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty, which was finally concluded in the summer of 1996, President Clinton being the first world leader to sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty.
We and the Chinese have not ratified, but the Russians have. The atmospheric tests, a couple hundred megatons of fission energy in the atmosphere, have been responsible for about 250,000 cancer deaths in the world population. So every time you pushed a button to detonate a megaton of fission yield in the atmosphere, 1,000 people were going to die as a result.
You know, people like Dick, who was involved in that study, played a crucial role, and without that, you know, history would be different.
Because of the New START Treaty, we're on track to cut American and Russian deployed nuclear warheads to their lowest levels since the 1950s. And maintain a strong and credible strategic deterrent while reducing our deployed strategic nuclear weapons by up to 1/3. And I intend to seek negotiated cuts with Russia to move beyond Cold War nuclear power.
Oh, they've mowed their lawn. These other lawns are badly in need of mowing. And that's our house there, the house we used to have, with the red tile roof and the cream-colored stucco-like paint. So I was raised in a two-family house. I was made to go to Sunday school, which was probably a good move on the part of my parents, because if you deny people religion when they're young, they may acquire it in bizarre ways when they're older. My father had graduated in electrical engineering. He was Jewish, and it wasn't possible to get a job as an electrical engineer at that time for that reason. So he got a job as a school teacher. My father had to earn a living, and he did by having 2 or 3 jobs. Teaching first, and then motion picture projection operator, which was compatible with teaching because people go to movies in the evening and on weekends. So I saw, people working hard all my life.
His first cousin was one of my best friends, and my brother was in his class in elementary school. But I didn't really know him at all until I was finishing up in high school, and he had gone to Case. And somehow or other he remembered me, and he came to find me. We were married in April. We were so very young, and we moved away from our family. The kind of father that Dick was is that he always wanted to tell the children more than they wanted to know. And so they would come to him for an explanation. And I remember hearing one or the other one of them saying, well, I'd like to hear more, but I really don't have time. I've got to go back and do my studying, or I have to write my paper.
Until 2 years ago, this was the way I drove to work every day. Soon after we bought our house in 1955, so I was 27 years old at that time, I remember walking around the bedroom and saying, look, what should I be doing in life? My family comes first, and then the country, the national security, the environment, and really very important is the preservation of a democratic system in the United States. And that's really the biggest risk, because if you don't have that, you can't solve the other problems. As I've been in this office since about 1979. Well, those are books that I've written or contributed to. So they've really overflowed that space, but anyhow, the things with labels on them are things that I've written. This is a 1958 Project Rand, Fred E. Clay, on the risk of an accidental or unauthorized nuclear detonation. And it used to be confidential, restricted data. Sometimes people say, after I give a talk, how can you sleep at night knowing all those things that can go wrong? Well, some of them I can control, some of them I can't. Sometimes the results of science could be out of control. Science brings a lot more things under control. Fundamentally, we have to hold our civilization together, and that means we must evolve. It used to be more breathtaking. They didn't have these abutments here. Notice here, if you look down, you can see our road way down below.
Yes.
You see it way down there as it comes off into that thing?
Yeah, I see it. Yeah. The first time I was here, it was in 1983, and it was a very tense period and very important for everybody because it was the Cold War. All the problematics, risk of using nuclear armament and the balance of power. The scientists responsible for this program were Edward Teller and Velikov, and they were sitting here together with Zikiki, telling, now, my friends, let's evaluate together the risk. The meaning of heritage was to have a point in the planet where people eating spaghettis discussed about some of the most dangerous things that could happen to the planet at this time, because they had direct relation to President Reagan, in the case of America, direct relation with the Kremlin, and according to what they said, they could destroy the world or save it.
Playing the global warming card is an easy game to play. I feel obliged to warn against the arguments and ambitions of the believers in the global warming picture. Their arguments and ambitions are very similar to those we used to live with decades ago under communism. Even the rhetoric is, for me, sounds very, very similar. It's difficult to prove that the human effect on the climate can be measured. The economic losses connected with the warming we may expect will be very small. The loss generated as a result of the completely useless fight against global warming would be far greater. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for the lecture. I have two problems with it. One is to impute to those people who want to have carbon taxes the desire to impose on others. I think that they see only the necessity, not the desire. I disagree. I don't believe that they are motivated by the old authoritarian communist tendencies.
Dick didn't agree, and he said so very calmly and very clearly without any doubt. Coming from him, it had carried a lot of weight. Without offending anyone, the man speaks softly, speaks slowly, he doesn't shout. All this makes it possible for him to clearly state his position without unnecessarily raising the heat.
Good evening. The world has never known a day quite like today. It faced the considerable uncertainties and dangers of the worst nuclear power plant accident of the atomic age. And the horror tonight is that it could get much worse. It is not an atomic...
So what did you do when 3 Mile Island blew?
I promptly went to the Incident Response Center. I was called there. And they put me in charge of a particular inquiry, which was to try to understand what became known as the hydrogen bubble. Several questions arose about that, and I was in charge of trying to sort that out.
NRC representatives observed operations in the plant during the crisis. Inspectors monitored the reactor controls.
Made some strategic telephone calls. 2 of people I contacted are in front of you. And it caused a lot of panic in the nearby neighborhood, as it would have.
Some radiated steam escaped into the atmosphere before the plant could be sealed off, but officials said there is no threat to health. The plant is 10 miles southeast of Harrisburg.
Later on, we figured out that it just wasn't so. There wasn't any hydrogen inside there.
I don't think that's right. I think the hydrogen bubble was real, and there wasn't any oxygen.
No, the hydrogen escaped through the relief valve, Dick, because that relief valve was cycled open and closed and open and closed.
The hydrogen did escape, but not all of it escaped.
But what we ascertained was even if there had been enough oxygen inside, the amount that was left couldn't have done anything.
I recall that there was a relief valve at the top of the pressure vessel, but there was no remote control on it. It only had manual operation. You had to go up there and turn its handle.
Which you couldn't do, it was too radioactive.
Well, you could. It would be certain death. No. But I said, look, there must be somebody, some old sick guy in the nuclear industry who would volunteer to be a hero. And they did this at Chernobyl. I don't know how voluntary it was, but they did get some divers to go down, certain death because of the high radiation level.
On April 9th, the reactor stabilized and Governor Thornburg lifted his advisory.
This means it is now considered safe for pregnant women and preschool children to return to their homes within a 5-mile radius of the 3 Mile Island site.
Okay, well, those were exciting times. We were lucky that the pressure did not rise high enough to burst the containment, but that was dumb luck.
But it was okay. I mean,
it was okay.
It was inside.
Yeah, well, it was fine. and only a tiny bit of radiation escaped from 3 Mile Island in contradistinction to Chernobyl or Fukushima Daiichi.
He has a mind that can take any problem happening in this world. He goes down to all the elements of the problem, but among those elements, the human being and the necessity to inform people about scientific matters that can be dangerous is always in his mind.
So here is the fallout pattern for some particular wind structure in Washington, D.C., and a 10-kiloton ground burst a block from where I work when I'm in Washington. Existing Washington, D.C. structures offer better than adequate protection, and you could reduce acute radiation casualties by 90%. Oh, yeah, right there. That's right.
There it is. You see it?
Oh, yes, just peeking over the brow of the hill.
Yeah, they hit it very well.
Here's the parking lot, and Temple's up there.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where we go. Okay.
And now can we walk from here to the
Temple, right.
Temple?
Yeah. It's not the Acropolis. The Acropolis is
I know it is.
clear.
It is an Acropolis.
Yeah, that's right. So the Roman Empire disappeared. Every other civilization has disappeared. And the United States, as the leader of civilization now, has problems. But it's pretty hard to argue for the total elimination of war when this country was born in war. Steel tools, well, iron tools, and abrasives. So you want to make a stone flat, you rub it against another stone, and you move it around, and it gets spherical. But if you have three, then you can make them flat. Oh, and the moon. I see a moon up there.
Oh, yeah. Just about a half moon.
Yeah, yeah, right. And you see the details here? Little projections coming down.
Yeah.
They look almost like wood.
Yeah.
I wonder what those were.
Right.
We'll look it up. We'll look on the web.
Okay.
And we'll find something good there. And up there, little details have been restored.
Yes, I see that.
I don't think any of that is
original.
Hold hand.